Good evening and welcome to Inside the Game with Coach Jim Evans and Coach John Blomstrann. We got a special guest tonight, Dan Woog. Dan, thanks for coming on.
Oh,
Yeah,
man.
thank you, Dan.
Look forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Dan is from Westport, Connecticut, and he's written 16 books, I think 6 of them on soccer. He's the Staples High School boys coach, but played at Staples way back, and just a tremendous soccer guy. And we're really going to have a great time tonight. So, again, welcome, Dan. Thanks for coming on.
You bet.
Yeah, just a few things about Dan and Staples High School, because if you look at the history of soccer in Connecticut, I mean, you can't get a bigger hotbed than Westport and Staples High School. They started as a school in 1958, which is the same year that E.O. Smith High School started. They've only had 3 coaches in the school's history, which is incredible, really. And Dan has been coaching the varsity coach since 2004. Albie Leffler is one of the most famous older coaches in Connecticut. I've never heard a bad word about him from anybody. And Jeff Lee was a coach after that. And, we had a big rivalry with E.O. Smith then before even Dan started coaching. Dan won a double L state championship in 2004. I think he came very close, maybe the year before. I think, Jim, you guys were talking about that earlier with another team, which we'll get to. Dan has an incredible Staples High School soccer website. I know he's a professional author and stuff, but boy, I looked at that and I thought maybe that was why I retired. It's just incredible. And I found a bunch of interesting stories on there. Jim and I know a lot of the players of Dan's age just from our connections at UConn and even in Nyack, New York and stuff with Franz. So, his incredible resume, both at Staples and Westport, and then with all his stuff involved with professional development with soccer. So glad to have you on, Dan.
Thanks. And all that stuff doesn't just fall from the sky. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. You got to play somebody, right? And you got to have opponents. You got to have rivals. You've got to have connections in the soccer world. And we've had some great ones. We were fortunate enough to play E.O. Smith as a regular season opponent in the 70s and early 80s. Met the Panthers many times in the state tournament. Yeah. And you gave a shout out to Westport as being a hotbed of soccer. But both Albie and Joe Maroney were the 2 guiding forces behind the Connecticut Junior Soccer Association. Yeah. When it started, they had great respect for each other, and Westport down in the Southwest, Stores in Mansfield up there in the Northeast, and it was, that wonderful spirit of competition, still lasts today, and I'm grateful for that.
And then probably Al Bell at Farmington too. They were all like in it together, right, with the beginning of junior soccer. Thank you. Yeah. So, I guess we should get to maybe our first question, Jim, and then we'll get into some more Staples history and stuff. Dan, what we usually ask all our guests, and, you can personalize your answers with all your experiences with your former players or yourself or your high school teammates. If you're a really young player, like just starting out in soccer, which of course is very young nowadays and was even then, what advice would you give to a very young player who wants to try to get good enough to play in high school, maybe play in college, maybe even nowadays there's more professional opportunities than there's ever been in the US. So what advice would you give to a young player to start on that path?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I should start out by saying that I was not a very good player. I was a bench player. there is an excuse. My teammates, of the 11 who played in front of me, 10 went on to be college captains. So,
wow, that's incredible. Yeah.
But they were a lot better than I was. But I think the answer to that really good question is the same now as it was back in the day. And there's several elements. I think the first one is play as much as you can in any format whatsoever. It can be a small-sided game. It can be 11v11. The cliche, the game is the best teacher, I think is really true. You can run around cones all you want. You can do all that stuff, but the real education of a soccer player comes from competing. And you can compete in many, many ways. You can be out there with your friends. You can be in a regular training environment where you're 4v4, 6v6, whatever the number is. But I think it's really important also to play against older players. And that's something that's fallen by the wayside as we've gotten into club soccer, where everything's really stratified. You're a 2004, you're a 2005, and never the twain shall meet. But in fact, John, I know, that the Smith players all got good by playing against the college guys. And when we were growing up, we would play. We had these legendary games every night. The high school kids, the college guys, the guys out of college, and the Murphys, the four Murphy brothers.
Yeah.
And they would just shred anybody. They didn't care if you were 9 years old. They'd take out your ankles, and then they teach you how to take out their own ankles. So play as much as you can in as many opportunities with older players as you can. Kyle Martino, the former NBC sports announcer, who's a Staples High School guy, when he was in 7th grade, he would go out with the high school kids. And he was, he's not a big guy, and he would get decked. But he would figure things out. He didn't play against kids his own age. So seek out those opportunities as much as you can. I am a huge proponent of futsal for many reasons, a couple of them being you get a ton of touches on the ball, you're in a really tight space, the ball doesn't, rise, so you get a chance to work on your moves. And it's a fun environment. It's a great environment where nobody's going to, yell at you if you do the wrong thing. So futsal is also great. I would say play as many positions as you can. Jim, as a college coach, if you're recruiting somebody, if he says he's a left midfielder, okay, you're thinking of him as a left midfielder. If he says, Coach, I can play anywhere, his stock has suddenly risen pretty high. I think when you are playing with friends, and I see this with our high school guys a lot, they think they're training. They go out to the field, they sit around, they talk, they kick into an open net, they play a little World Cup, and they go home and they think they've trained. Or they think and they haven't. So my advice would be keep it as competitive as you can. If you got 8 guys there, you're playing 4v4, play for something. Okay, we're going to play to 3, losers run. Get into a competitive mindset that way. A couple of other things to this mythical young player who wants to join our national team. Work on maximize your strengths and minimize your weaknesses. If you're really good at free kicks, take every opportunity you have to get even better, but also take every opportunity you can to work on your weak foot. don't just rely on whatever got you there. And I would say the two last things: have fun. It's not a job; it's a game. Enjoy every moment you're out there. Enjoy being with your friends. Enjoy being with the older guys who, kick your butt all over the place. And when you leave, don't think, oh my God, I have training tomorrow. Think, wow, I'm sorry this had to end. I can't wait to get out there. And tied in with that, I would say my last point is, do not get sucked in to what I think is having a real detrimental effect on soccer in America right now. And that's the elite club structure. There's great competition in plenty of clubs. There's excellent training, but it's not the only path. You don't have to spend every weekend on the road, going up and down the Northeast. You don't have to spend thousands of dollars. You can get really good training locally. You can play on a club that is right for you, especially if you're not the number one or number two guy. Why not be a leader on your local club? Why not learn how to impact the game? So there are a lot of ways to the top, and they all come down to playing as much as you can against older people and having fun. Long answer to a short question.
No, it was a great answer. And Jim, I'll yield to you, but I just wanted to say that Dan has hit on a ton of topics that we've already talked about, playing with older players. I know Jim seeked out that environment and around the Hartford area and the north end of Hartford. And my E.O. Smith players who've been on this show, they always mention that, like that sort of unstructured competitive environment. And the one thing I'd add too is get some sidelines. You know what I mean? You have to start constricting this space in your competitive games, to make it really beneficial, especially as you improve as players,
That's a great point. You got 8 players out there playing on a full field. And
yeah, it's not that good. Yeah, go ahead, Jim. I'm sure you can.
Yeah, we did a lot of those things out of necessity, really, back in the old days. And, playing with older players. We used to play in these little tiny gyms in Hartford in the winter. We'd never heard of futsal, but that's what we were doing. We were playing futsal, And, I remember the little gym at Noah Webster School. 3-on-3 was crowded. It was a little elementary school. And there would be, 12 or 15 guys there. So there were guys waiting to play. You play to 2 goals, winner stays on. Yeah. And man, I'll tell you, it was for real, because you didn't want to sit out. And so, yeah, we did all those things. And it was before the days of club soccer, and I want to echo that about the big time clubs and all that. And there's certainly a lot of great coaching going on in the clubs, but there's also, a lot of the clubs tend to want to dominate that player. They don't want the player to get an experience anywhere else, even if it's a little soccer camp run by somebody else. They got to go to their soccer camp, and we touched on that a little bit, in that because of the financial situations, you got guys that are full-time, they got to make their livelihood doing this. Whereas in our day, it was a high school teacher who was the coach, and it was, a guy had another job. He didn't have to, a lot of guys that we learned from didn't get a nickel from coaching, Yeah. So, but no, that was, those were some great points. While we're asking these questions, we may as well ask the second one now too. What advice would you give to a young guy or a gal who wants to make a go at coaching?
Another great question. And I've realized the importance of coaches over the years. I'm a pretty active member in United Soccer Coaches, and that's a great organization for any coach at any level, youth through pro, just in terms of resources and networking and and thinking of yourself as a professional, not a coach, but a coach. I think one thing that coaches should realize is it's a player's game. And I say this to our guys all the time. This is not football. It's not basketball. We don't call timeout, pick up our chalkboard and diagram a play. We don't stop every 30 seconds and send some new guy in with, some new play. And once the whistle blows, it is the player's game. They have to figure stuff out. They have to communicate. They have to solve problems. And I think that's why soccer attracts some really, really smart, independent thinkers, creative people who don't like being told what to do. So what does a coach do? I think it's important to create an environment where those players can flourish. Set up the training so that you give the players the tools to figure things out on their own. It's easier said than done, obviously, but if you think of yourself as a training coach rather than a game coach, I think you go a long way to being successful. Once the whistle blows, it's out of our hands. And much as we like to think we can influence things, we really can't. I think it's important to trust your instincts and to go with your gut in terms of players and what works and what might not work, but also ask for advice. Ask your assistants, ask your other head coaches, ask your colleagues, ask people at other schools, ask your players. What do you think? Here's the situation, and get advice from as many people as you can. And tied into that is steal liberally, steal drills.
Yeah, we all do that.
Yeah. Steal training sessions. Just steal, whether it's tactical or technical or whatever. And give credit where credit is due. There's great stuff out on the internet. I mean, you can find anything you want, and much of it's contradictory. Here's how we do it. Here's how they do it, and they're diametrically opposed. But look at it and figure stuff out. I think you should realize that other coaches are friends, not enemies. You need two teams to play. And, I know when I started coaching, I looked at everything as a zero-sum game. And it's not. Enjoy the camaraderie of your fellow coaches. The guy who just kicked your ass, or the woman whose ass you just kicked, because it's all going to come around eventually. And I think in terms of parents, which we could do 25 different shows about, the main thing is to realize that they have a narrow point of view. They are looking at the game through their kids' eyes, with very few exceptions. There's some parents out there who can be pretty objective, but many times, they're watching their own kid. They don't see the other 10 or the 11 on the other team. And that's natural. I mean, it's your kid. But if you realize that everything they do is filtered through their child, then you don't spend nights tearing out what little hair I have, worrying about their point of view. And I think the last thing is to recognize that you coach every kid the same, which means you realize that every kid is an individual. So I'll treat all my players as individuals. They're not all the same. There's the jokesters, there's the kid who's too serious. There's the one who needs everything explained verbally, and the one who you have to physically show him. But even more than that, I've learned that every kid has something inside that he or she is hiding. Whether it's feeling different, because of race or religion or sexuality or the wrong shoes. No matter how they present, they've all got something inside of them. So those 2 hours that you're with them training every day should be joyful for those kids. And if you realize that they're out there because they want to be, and that they are not as confident as they might look, or whatever, realize there's something going on in their life that you may never know, and just create that environment where they can flourish. You will be a successful coach, and the wins will follow. If you start worrying about the W's at the beginning, it'll be tough. But if you lay that groundwork, then you're going to have a team that's going to win a lot more than they don't. And John and I both know that, and Jim too. You very seldom win them all, much as we would like to.
That's true. There's so much there too, Dan. I just wanted to say a couple things. Just great advice overall in a lot of areas, but like stealing stuff from other people, we all do that, and we don't really call it stealing. I just thinking of corner kick defense, and I'm sure you two have the same experience. If you're coach a long time, not every team that you have each fall does the same things well with corner kick defense. And I remember seeing at the NSCA conventions, which is what you're talking about, USC, the Canadian national team staff long ago showing how to defend zonally on corners. And I was so impressed with that presentation that E.O. Smith started defending zonally on corners, since the early 80s. And I thought we did really well on it. And then you run into a team that just can't stop giving up corner kick goals, and there's a ton of stuff to steal out there from watching TV on soccer, which kids have the opportunity now, from watching World Cup cycles and, going to conventions. But there's an opportunity, I think, to get your team's input too, because if you can't defend well on corners, you got to ask them, what do you want to do? How are you going to stop these guys? And you can change, you can change to fit the characteristics of your team. You can play straight man to man. You could play some combination, which probably people do a lot now. But yeah, that's the kind of thing you're saying, Dan, that every team is different and every season is different. And coach shouldn't be a systems coach. He should be an adapter, basically. Yeah. Corner kick defense is a good example.
And John and I did not talk about this before, but this past fall, we probably gave up more corner kick goals in our shortened season than all my other seasons put together. We were just atrocious. And we tried everything. So at the end of the year, we just said to the kids, we're through. You guys figure out what you're doing next year. You got 10 months to do it. Yeah. It's on you.
Wow. That sounds similar to a few of my teams recently. Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to bring up a couple of E.O. Smith Staples connections in high school soccer. And, that would be a whole show too. And some of it precedes Dan coaching. But I'll tell you that there aren't many highlights with E.O. Smith and Staples as far as the overall picture. I can think of one Jim knows Tom Greaser. When he was a senior at E.O. Smith, I mean, we had really good teams. We didn't win all the time, but we did win in '91 against Danbury and Glastonbury. And I think it might have been that year that we knocked out Staples at Tunxus Mead. Might have been in a semi. And yeah, it's one of my only memories of doing well against Staples. And I'll go through a couple of the other examples, but Tom Greaser flicked a long free kick from maybe half field over the keeper's head. You know, the kind of goal where the keeper thinks he's going to catch it. And then, Jim, you probably scored something like this, right? And then the forward just flicks it perfectly under the crossbar. I think it was a 1-0 game, and it might have been '91. It was somewhere in that area. But let me just continue, and then I'll stop talking. In Dan's website, it mentioned that they came back in 2014 from a 3-1 deficit against West Haven. West Haven was a highly rated team and maybe scored 3 of those goals right at the end of the second half, and Dan can comment on it. And it just struck me because I looked up the history of E.O. Smith soccer, and in 1996, we had a home game. In the first round, we were highly rated against West Haven, and we were behind 3-1 late in the game. And you know how tournament games go. It's hard to score a lot of goals. We scored 2 at the end of regulation. We scored 1 in overtime, and we beat West Haven 4-3. Just a sort of a unbelievable coincidence against the same team. And Dan had mentioned that I think that was their best comeback in maybe Staples school history. The only other one I want to say is in 2004, we went to Staples. Dan was coaching. We might have got in a traffic jam, but we did one time. We came late to a game.
You got there very late.
Yeah, and we lost 4-0, and just, you know, that there aren't many scores bigger than 4-0 that E.O. Smith has ever lost in regular season or the tournament. And I hate to do this to Dan, but then I noticed the next game, and he can tell you the score in Staples' next tournament game because it just struck me. After we're getting killed 4-0, then they played Newtown in the semis. And you older high school coaches remember Marcus Tracy, who was a great forward at Newtown High School. So go ahead, Dan. You can add to that.
It was 7-1, and the one came with about 30 seconds left, and you know they lit us up. It was. I remember waking up the next morning at like 5 a.m. and going to the Y to work out my frustrations in the fitness center.
And they did win the whole thing. They were that good. They won the whole thing.
Yeah, they had a lot of momentum after that game. But that's, you know, sort of the ups and downs of soccer. You know, you get a game like that, and you know, you go from high to a low or low to a high. I mean, we faced Newtown a few years later in the state tournament, and we were up 2-0, and they came back in the last 5 or 6 minutes and tied us 2-2, and we ended up winning it in PKs. But the kids came down to training the next day, and they said, "Dan, we're rattled." And I had never heard soccer players say that. No, we're rattled. You know, so we sat and talked and said, you know, how do we manage to give up 2 goals in a situation like that? You know, what do we need to do differently? What, you know, how much is mental? How much is, and they talked, and you know, they went on a run after that. You know, so you go from the low to the high. 2019, playing Glastonbury. You know, I mean, Glastonbury is now the gold standard now in Connecticut.
Yeah, lately for sure. Yeah,
they had not been scored on in the state tournament since 2016. They were 3-time champs, we were down 2-0 in the first 14 minutes. And, I was, oh my God, this is going to be worse than Newtown. We very luckily got one back right before halftime, make it 2-1. Still down 2-1 with 7 minutes to go. And we got 2 in the last 7 minutes. It had nothing to do with me or anything. It was just this group of kids who decided we're going to get it done. Next game was against Trumbull. They have our number. I think we have beaten them once in 15 games, dating back 10 years. I mean, they have our number. And we were down 1-0 with 2 or 3 minutes to go. We tied it up, and it went to PKs. And they had a PK game right before us, so we knew which way their shooters like to go. And our assistant devised a little plan. He would hold the ball, to the left side if the kid was going to that side, to the right side if he was going the other way, hold it up here if the kid was going high, and split if the kid was going low. So
is that legal?
We were ready.
I think it is.
We were ready. What we hadn't done was trained our keeper well enough. We told him this was what we were going to do, but we didn't train it. So he didn't cheat. He didn't do anything. He stayed on his line, and when the whistle blew, he moved, and he didn't save any of them. And we made 4, and our third kicker, sort of, I don't think it reached the goal line, and that was that. So John, it's no matter what you do, but those are the stories then that you trot out, for the next 30 years.
Yeah, I'm sure we all have PK game stories. E.O. Smith, in the state tournament, we made 11 PKs in a row and won 13-12 or something like that against Greenwich. It was against Greenwich in the tournament game. How about, what was the most you guys ever took, Dan?
We had 2 on our way to the state finals. We had 2 consecutive PK games, both of which went to 2 rounds. And we made 18 of the 19. The 19th, I think, is still up there somewhere over Nonawag High School. But then we've lost the last 2 PK games that we've lost. And I know did you, John, practice PKs?
We only practice it very late, almost in the tournament season itself, because I hate wasting time earlier in the year, but we do practice them during the tournament run. Yeah.
Because there are coaches who will say, we don't practice them. You can't replicate the pressure, and it's not even worth it. But
yeah,
if anybody asked, which you didn't and nobody ever has, but my preference would be to do it in 5-minute increments, and every 5 minutes you take 1 or 2 players off the field. And it does several things. Number one, it rewards problem solving. It rewards fitness. And it's not going to be 2v2. Pretty soon on a bigger field, you're going to get a winner. And we do it in our summer league games, which is short-sided, 6v6, 7v7.
Yeah.
And I'd love to use that instead of PKs, because PKs, it comes down to a keeper or a shooter, and that's not what the game is.
Yeah.
Team game.
And that's why I always supported the CIAC stance of co-champions, because I feel like if it's a PK game in the final, it's better to be considered both state champions than have a loser and a winner. I know that's controversial, but like in 2002, we tied Danbury High School, if I have the year right. Anyways, one of those years we tied them, and we're no, 1998. We're co-champions instead of, because there's no PKs in the final.
Yeah.
There's no PKs in the final. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe we should talk a little bit about the old. I know Staples has great players throughout the history, but because of our ages, we know Timmy Hunter, and we know Paul Hunter, and we know Neil Brickley, and a lot of your teammates.
Steve Levin and Dana Hollingsworth.
Yeah, and
Wow.
just maybe some of your experiences with playing with all those guys. I know we looked up the history that you have on your website, and I knew that Nyack, New York, actually played Staples, or Westport at least, where Franz is from. So that seemed like, E.O. Smith won in their little tournament class a ton in the 60s, like with the Fitzgerald brothers. And but Westport around that time, 60s and early 70s, seemed like your heyday. And that's when you played, right, Dan?
That's when I sat on the bench, right?
Yeah.
But the remarkable thing, I think, all these years later, is that those guys, my teammates and a few years ahead and after, are still really tight. And I know that's true of the Smith teams, spending all that time together, training, playing, talking, going to matches together, is really important. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but in terms of high school soccer, I think that's really important for kids to play with their friends in front of their community, walk down the street and have little kids see their jacket and say, oh, I saw him play that, I want to play for Staples or Smith or Glastonbury or Farmington or whomever, when they grow up. And I think as much as the current academy teams and elite club teams, as much as they do in terms of providing great competition and solid coaching, you don't have that tight group of friends who, when the parent dies 20 years later, the teammates fly across country for the funeral, or when they get together, for some event, they pick up exactly where they left off. And I think there's something to be said for that. For the kid who's going to be the national player or go to Europe or whatever, that's his focus, and that's great. But whatever the percentage is, 99.98% of them, they're not going to play in Europe. They're not going to play in MLS. So let them have that experience of growing up that they'll have for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, and Jim and Dan were talking before the show about one of Dan's most memorable seasons, and it so happens to coincide with your son Ian actually being on Simsbury High School, right? So you might, Dan, you might want to talk a little bit about that. That was the same season you were talking about before, right?
Yeah.
And Jim clearly remembers, I guess it was the final game, right? Yeah. So you guys should talk about that a little bit. Yeah.
It was 2006. We had a senior-laden team, great group of kids, very competitive. Twins got in a fist fight at one of our training sessions, and everybody say, "Oh, Dad, it's just they always do that." And I said, "Well, they really can't do it when I'm supervising." But it was a remarkable season. That was the season where we had the 2 PK games back to back. Wow. But it was also a season in which 3 of the fathers of players died during the season. And it was the emotional role, 2 of them were within 48 hours of each other. Wow. And the emotions of that season, of the way they came together and the way they dealt with adversity, is one of the most remarkable things I've ever been a part of. And it was fortunate that they were all friends. They had all played together for years. They were seniors. They were a little more mature. But we came off those 2 PK games into the finals against a really good Simsbury team. And it was at Willowbrook Park in New Britain. And it was a night game. We had to, I don't know if you remember, Jim.
Yeah, I was at the game too.
The match before us, the L final, went into overtime. So both teams, I'm sure, were amped up and sitting in the locker room waiting for that interminable overtime to finish. And we went out there. We started really, really strongly and missed a couple of sitters. Would have been nice to have been up 3-0 at halftime, but we weren't. And I think it was 1-1 at halftime or 1-1 shortly thereafter. And went to Golden Goal, which is also known ironically as sudden death. And Simsbury had this great, long, twisting, curling shot that Jim told me that the player had trained for a keeper who was off his line all season long. And that was it. You know, this team that had battled such adversity and been through so much together were shattered. And they took this walk. I still have the photo, and it brings tears to my eyes whenever I see it. They made that, you know, they'd always done that traditional jog, you know, to wave to the parents at the end of the game and jog back. And this time they just trudged. I mean, it was a slow, somber walk. They got to the other side and they came back. And, you know, we talked for a while about everything that they'd been through. And, you know, we were sort of debriefing and they made heartfelt. One of the kids said, you know, this is the greatest moment of my life. And it was just, the lights went off. And it was, you know, one of those moments that you really will never forget. And we were headed toward the bus, and a sophomore kid who had never gotten into the game, he rarely played. He was, you know, one of those who we were getting ready for the next couple of years. I looked over and he was just bereft. He was sobbing, these guttural sobs. And I went over and I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, if I had tried harder, you know, they would have been better and we would have won. You know, and I just, wow. I mean, that, you know, to me, sort of, you never want to hear it, but to see what it meant to him was remarkable. And I'm really glad, in fact, when we were talking with Jim the other day, you know, that he gave me that backstory, because I'll tell you, that was quite a shot.
Jim, talk a little bit about your son's goal and then what you said about them chipping the keeper in practice all year.
It was I remember Staples came out flying and scored a quick goal, and like Dan said, they could have been up 2 or 3, and Simsbury defenders were kind of in shock, you know, and the keeper came up with a couple of big saves, and then my son was the left back, so he didn't score very many goals. He only had a couple of goals all season. Good player, and they had a free kick, and the same kid who scored the goal set up the free kick goal, and he told the kid, "Put it on my head at the far post." And he didn't put it on his head, but he put it on his foot, and it was a nice volley at the back post to make it 1-1. And then I'm going to share what Dan, we were talking the other day, and Dan felt like the winning goal was kind of lucky, which I could understand because it was from just inside his own half.
Yeah.
But all season long, the backup keeper on Simsbury, who was like a sophomore and, you know, didn't play at all behind the senior, he just was a wanderer. He was always off his line, and they chipped him all season. and his last name was Jetty. I don't even know his first name because they all called him Chip Jetty, and they would yell Chip Jetty and they would chip him, and so they had practiced chipping the goalie all season long, and it was really ironic that that's how the season ended.
That's an astonishing story, and it makes me feel a lot better. The PS to that whole story, that long story, is that one of the players who, his name is Preston Hurton, who kept our team together during that really, really difficult season. He wasn't a captain, but he was one of those kids who acts as a captain. 3 years later, at Mary Washington University, on the first day of preseason, he collapsed and died of an enlarged heart that had not been diagnosed. So there was that one more death with that group, and the Mary Washington kids, all came up for the service. I mean, it was just right in the beginning of preseason, our preseason, and his father, Preston's father, read something that Preston had written at the service, and what he read was what Preston had said at our season-ending banquet. And Preston had asked me if he could speak, and I said, so long as you don't embarrass anybody, go ahead. And Preston gave this heartfelt speech about what the season meant to him, and it ended up, his final line was, "Today my heart is full, boys." And his father read that speech at the service, ending with, "Today my heart is full." And I'll tell you, I mean, that was a season I will never, ever forget.
Yeah. Wow. I have one other story that's sort of, it's not as tragic, of course, but same idea with the long, what seemed like lucky shot. My first year of coaching was 1980. And you guys remember that Hall High School had a kid named Yuri Fishman.
Oh my God.
And he had scored like 50 goals that year, I think, over 50. And, we got to the Double L state championship. I think it was at Manchester High School. In my first year, it just seemed easy to me. But also Steve Clark. Steve Clark was probably the best goalkeeper I ever had. And he was a freshman in 1980. And you guys know, as coaches, it's difficult when you have a gifted freshman and you have seniors who are good players, and you have to sort of develop that. How do you replace an older player with a young star? And especially when you're a young coach like me. But Steve Clark had given up 5 goals to Rocky Hill High School at the end of the 1980 regular season. We lost 5-1.
Wow.
So I made the change back to the senior goalkeeper, who was a great kid. And we tied Hall High School in regulation 2-2. Yuri Fishman, I might have scored both the goals. But we're in overtime, or golden goal, whatever you call it. And some kid, we believe, tried to hit a long cross. But, it's in front of our benches. You know where the benches are, with his left foot. And it goes all the way to the crossbar. And our good goalkeeper was not caught way out of position, but as he reached for it, it went off his fingertips and just dribbled into the goal, and we lost 3-2 in overtime. And Tom Nevers Sr., remember, was the coach at Eastern Connecticut State University, and David Nevers was a good player on that team. And it was so nice. Tom Nevers Sr. went right up to my senior goalkeeper and just said, right after the game, that happens to everybody. And he really, wow. It was nice to be consoled by a college coach and a parent on the team, So Yeah, that was another chip goal that I thought was lucky. I don't know. It was quite a goal, though.
And Yuri went on to Princeton.
Oh, he did?
Played at Princeton.
Wow. Yeah, he was that funny body shape, but man, was he talented. Yeah. He was amazingly talented.
Yeah. So we have a few people. Jim Chemansky's a guy that played at Thomas College under me. Bill Swartz recruited him. So we had 2 years with Bill and 2 with me or something like that. And he's a coach, really good coach in Maine. And one of his players plays for me at Thomas. And he just knows the game inside out, the kid, because Jim knows the game inside out. So Jim always watches the show and just says hello. Yeah. And then Victor Santos, he always comes. We had him on the show. We had a good show with him.
Oh, man. Good guy.
Yeah, great guy. I met Victor when I first started playing in the Connecticut Soccer League, and he was kind of ending his playing career, and he was a great player, and he was tough, and he welcomed me the way an older player welcomes a younger player, you know.
And Dan, you remember around 91 or so, 92 for Victor, his son played. They had Kevin Hickey. They had the brothers that coached at University of Hartford. They had a great team at that.
The Natali brothers. Yeah, they were a good side. Yeah. This guy, Helder Guedes, is a Portuguese guy who knows everything there is to know about Connecticut soccer. He always chimes in.
You know what? That's a good point. That as sort of suburban as Westport was, and Mansfield as well, there's that great ethnic heritage of soccer in Connecticut. The Portuguese, the Italians, the Hartford Jamaicans, the Polish teams, New Britain. I mean, and those are. This goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, John and Jim. Our high school guys were playing against those teams, and they learned a lot from them. I mean, that was really pivotal.
Kyle Martino said something fantastic. My son actually told me. I didn't hear him say it, but he said it on TV a few years ago. And he said when he made one of the junior national teams or something like that, or he was being considered, and these coaches were throwing it around that he was the best player of his age in the country. And he told his friends, he said, I play pickup games in Bridgeport. I'm not even the best player there, Well, he knew the deal,
Yeah.
But that, he sought out those games.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's, I think in the environment today, where parents tend to micromanage a lot of stuff, why would you want to go to Bridgeport? Or, it's a different era. And when you find the kid who does that, who really has that competitive drive and is able to do that, that kid is going to go far.
Yeah.
Dan, I think the only time we played against Kyle Martino was in that preseason scrimmages. Remember, we used to go to North Haven.
Yeah.
Those were good scrimmages. And I remember we played against you guys then.
Yeah. Those were great. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just read another good, funny thing about Kyle just 2 weeks ago. It was some of his guys that would have been his age that played MLS as well. And it might have been an ODP regionals or something like that. And they didn't know who he was. And they were watching. They might have been the next year up. And they were watching. And they saw this kid just lighting people up, and he was standing right in front of them with the ball. And a kid came running at him. So, of course, Kyle megged him. And they were all going, whoa. And Kyle turned around and goes, he shouldn't have been running at me, and he took off, So.
He's doing great stuff now, developing these. He's sort of created a court that can be used on basketball courts. That it's hard to describe, but it's sunken in the ground and very easily pops up with a goal to use when a basketball court is unavailable. His goal is now to bring that to underserved communities, and it's a great product.
Excellent.
Goalpher, Goalpher, Goalpher.
Huh. Yeah. We all know Timmy Hunter is opinionated and can be critical. And I remember Timmy just talking about Kyle Martino when Kyle Martino was pretty young, maybe even before Staples High School. And he said, kid can really play. He might have coached him at like youth soccer or something like that. Or maybe it was just pickup at Staples High School. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, so we're just about out of time. Dan, thanks so much for coming on. I knew it was going to be a great show. It's really good.
God, we could do another 10 hours.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Okay, so if you guys don't have anything else, I think I'm going to wrap it up, and we'll call it a night. So again,
thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan and John. Whole Staples, even when I was in high school, Staples and Smith was a big thing. And back then, Simsbury High School was really good in football and cross country, but not soccer. So I just had to watch.
They're doing great stuff now. So thank you both. It's been a great hour.
Okay.
Right. Sounds good. Thanks.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Yeah.